Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode and I have 3 questions. I'm going to do a bonus question today. So we're going to go through 4 questions. 3 plus 1 is 4. So we're going to do 4 questions today just because I'm not going to spend, usually what I like to do is have 3, spend a little bit more time on 1, but I think these are going to be good 4 questions to go over. I had a really hard time figuring out which one I was going to cut out. So I was like, hey, let's just do 4 today, right? So before I go into that though, just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you found this podcast be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, I want to continue to get this information and more out to more people, and rating and reviews are definitely going to help with that, right? Again, I appreciate everybody who listens, but again, if you found this to be helpful in any way, and if you think other people would benefit from this, if you could just leave that quick rating and review, again, that will really go a long way and appreciate it. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it, go in the ins and outs of it, and the link to that is in the show notes. And then next, I have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization. Again, what it is, how to do it, and go over each phase, any common mistakes, how to make adjustments, really go into every single nutrition phase. Again, the link to that is in the show notes. And again, it's completely free as well. Next, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. If you ever have any questions or you'd like to get one of your questions answered and be on this podcast, give me a follow on that. If there's anything that I've ever said that didn't make sense, you needed further clarification, let me know. Even if you had maybe an opposing viewpoint to what I said, let me know, and yeah, we can go from there. So again, make sure you give me a follow there. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So first question I have, is it common to be ravenously hungry on maintenance calories? Long story short, no, I would say it's not common. If a client came to me and we were supposed to be at maintenance and they're just finding out that they're ravenously hungry, here's some things that I would look into. So first, are you trying to stay too lean? A lot of times people they do a fat loss phase and they're like, okay, now I'm going to maintain, and they lost a good amount of weight and they're pretty lean. Again, this is all going to be dependent on the person, but they really tried to maintain that exact weight, right? And then because of that, they end up being in a deficit, even though they aren't really necessarily, or they're just trying to stay too lean, essentially, is the issue here. And because of that, your body is going to be like, hey, yeah, again, our weight's not moving, right? So theoretically, we're at maintenance because, our weight's not moving. But again, you're trying to maintain too low of a body weight here, and you're going to be hungry no matter what. Like you could sit here and again, just be at maintenance. You could be doing all the things that we talk about from a hunger management standpoint, lifting weights, and you're still going to be hungry, right? Because you're just trying to stay too lean. So if this is you to where I don't want to see my weight go up at all, that's going to be your issue. And that's something that you need to work through. So again, staying too lean can cause you to be more hungry than normal. So again, this is why when I have clients get to their maintenance calories, we also want to look at their biofeedback, because if they're still displaying some symptoms of either being too lean or being in a deficit, we need to look into that. So that's my big thing. Are you trying to stay too lean? Second, are you actually at maintenance? So again, this kind of goes back to staying too lean, but again, some people, whether or not again, the leanness is very probably less people than you would think, right? Because most people, to get as lean as they really want to and think that to where they're really going to show symptoms of being too lean, most people are going to have a tough time getting to that point just to begin with, because it is very challenging. I'm not saying it can't happen, but again, for most people, that's not the case. But however, I think the bigger issue are the people that they do a fat loss phase and then they want to see their weight stay the same. They don't want to see it come up at all. And so you're probably not actually at your maintenance. There's going to be a little bit of weight gain potentially when you bring your calories back up to maintenance. Now, again, this isn't fat gain, and it's going to mostly be water weight, glycogen storage topping out, just having more food in your system. And so again, if you're just really trying to avoid seeing any amount of weight gain, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot, and you might not actually be at your maintenance, even though your weight is staying somewhat steady there, right? So those are the first 2 big things I would look at, because again, I think a lot of people's expectations of maintenance is that they're going to maintain this really lean look or they're not going to see any weight gain. And that itself can lead to some of these issues here where you're like, I'm at maintenance calories, but I'm still hungry. What's going on? And again, it's just, you're in that low energy availability state. Next, could we improve your food quality? So again, are you taking if it fits your macros approach, where you're fitting foods in, you're hitting your macros, but again, it's low fiber, maybe proteins, okay. Sorry, I'm getting a messenger audio, which is super interesting. Could food volume be low, right? It's low food volume stuff, low nutrient density, higher calorie density type foods. That's definitely going to be something that can make it really challenging to, like, you're going to feel hungrier, right? Even if you are at maintenance. So again, we need to make sure that could we potentially improve our food volume, diet quality there with that, right? So again, that would be something that we would look at. Could we improve meal timing? Is it something where you're maybe having too many small meals throughout the day, so you're just always hungry, you're never really getting a meal that's getting you full? Could you time it better throughout your day? Could you have these are all things that we would look at here with that. Again, could we improve that to potentially bring down this hunger that you're having in maintenance? Is your sleep off? Is stress high, right? Again, both of these things are going to be things that could impact your hunger. If you have high stress levels that are unmanaged or not managed in a healthy way, again, that could spike up your hunger there with that, and especially for calorie dense foods. And again, we know the more calorie dense foods you have compared to nutrient dense foods, your hunger is probably going to be higher. And if you're already not actually at your maintenance calories, then you're going to find out that you're going to be ravenously hungry. Again, sleep too. Sleep's another one where if that's off, that's going to impact hunger and cravings and everything like that. So these are all things that I would look at with clients. If it's like, hey, we're supposed to be at maintenance and I'm just ravenously hungry. All right, these are things that we need to look at. Also look at when you do eat, are you eating in an undistracted state, or are you just eating your food super quickly, right? Again, that can be another big thing there. Also, do you have like really high levels of physical activity, right? Are you using these high levels of physical activity to be lean or to get leaner, right? That could be another big thing where these really high levels of physical activity, high intense training, a lot of it could spike up your hunger potentially, right? So again, these would all be things I would look at. So ideally though, you would not be ravenously hungry at your true maintenance. Do I think that there's going to be a little bit of hunger? Probably, right? Especially, I do think this depends on the person and their eating history, diet history, and whatnot. And if they lost a ton of weight, because again, if you lost a ton of weight, that's going to be something that could potentially impact your hunger and cravings as well too, right? Because you're always going to have that natural kind of instinct. Your body's always going to want to go back to where it was, right? So, well, what's going on here? We were in this awesome spot. We had plenty of energy around. We need to get back to that state. So I think for that person, you're always going to have a little bit of hunger involved, even at your maintenance, right? But you also need to look at these other things. But at the end of the day, I would say that's really the only time where there's probably going to be some hunger involved is if you've lost a good amount of weight. The other would be if you're like way away from like where you're used to being, which goes hand in hand with what I just said, but that could also be maybe you weren't really overweight, but you got super lean. Again, now you're maybe just maintaining too lean or the leanness you're trying to maintain is just where your body's, it's going to be hungry, right? But again, like I said, at the end of the day, I think a little bit of hunger is fine. Again, this is also going to be based on your diet history and the things that we do. If you're ravenously hungry, that's definitely a sign that you need to look into things a little bit more there. Helpful. And I added a few things that I actually didn't answer on my Instagram there because mainly the one where somebody was overweight and they lost a good amount of weight. Again, they're just unfortunately always going to have a little bit of hunger. But this is why I track these things with clients because, again, we want to make sure that all this is in a good spot. Look at your libido. Look at your kind of relationship with food. Do you have a lot of food? These are all things that we want to look at. Look at training performance. We want to make sure that's in a good spot. But like I said, I think if you have a history of really being food focused, again, you may find that for you being at maintenance, you're going to have just a little bit higher hunger than someone who has less like food focus. And then on top of it, again, if you've lost a lot of weight and or you're super lean, you're going to have, and you've had this history of maybe really enjoying food, which who doesn't, but really being food focused, a lot of your stuff that you do is revolved around food. I think, again, your hunger is going to be higher, but this is where we'll have these strategies in place and just look into if somebody's hungry, hey, maybe we need to add some calories, right? And you're not actually at your maintenance. All right. So second question is weight is static, slow, steady performance gains. Does this imply recomp? I think this is a good sign, but we would still need to look into this a bit more. Okay. These are all numbers here because it's okay. So weight static, again, that's technically a good thing, but what is your body composition? So this is where we would want to look into that a little bit more. Slow, steady performance gains. What does that look like? Because a lot of times people are from a muscle building standpoint, like what's the rep range that we're working in? What's the exercise selection here, right? Because again, if we're doing 1 rep maxes for back squats or conventional deadlifts and we're seeing slow, steady performance gains, you're maybe building a tiny bit of muscle, but you're probably not maximizing things. So we don't know for sure there with that, right? So there's some things that we would want to dive into deeper on this, but it certainly is a good sign, right? If you're in this position where your weight hasn't really moved much and you're really improving your weight training performance, this is a good sign. And this is definitely things are leading in the right direction here. But again, we want to look at what were some things that we would want to also look into here with this, right? What does your progress pics look like compared to previous ones? People overlook this, right? What do your progress pictures say? Like, again, sometimes it can be hard to spot this, especially some small changes, because we're usually our own worst critic here on this. Looking at your progress pictures can be super helpful because it's okay. I clearly built muscle. Again, you don't really need anything to tell you that. So you can see it. So again, we want to look at your progress pictures. What are your circumference measurements doing? Because again, if you're having this kind of slow, steady performance gains, weight static, but your waist measurements aren't really changing, nothing else is really changing from a measurement perspective, does that imply? To me, it would be hard. That's going to tell us a little bit more. Okay, still maybe, but again, that's not necessarily a great sign. So again, we'd want to look into that. Again, with measurements, though, just like with progress pictures, it's going to have its potential errors with it, right? Again, and it's really going to be hard to see a significant amount of change in a short period of time, especially from a muscle building standpoint, right? So again, we're taking all these together, and that's going into our decision-making process here. How our clothes are fitting, right? If your clothes are fitting better where it's like your weight's staying static, but it's like you're getting tighter in the upper body and like on your limbs and stuff like that's a good sign that you're, recomping here in this process. And then does it seem like you're adding muscle? Do things just feel tighter? These are all things that we would factor in, right? So through social media and like on this podcast, I can sit here and be like, hey, here's what recomp looks like. Really, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to these are good metrics, but we want to look into things a little bit more. And then from there, this is why I think having a coach can be super valuable here, because then you can get that coach's experience working with other clients and obviously their knowledge on this topic. And you can formulate like, hey, you are recomping, right? All these things tell me that, or maybe things are a little bit slower in one area. So here's how we can improve this. And so this is where you can rely on that experience. And people want that answer of yes, you are, or this is the exact thing you need to look for, when there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And then you have to combine those together. And that's where you can formulate your response of, yeah, this is good stuff happening. But a lot of times I think we overlook just how things are in the mirror and whatnot there. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, good sign, but doesn't mean for sure. And the answer I just gave there is going to be similar to the answer for this question. So how important is soreness for muscle growth? So first, it's not mandatory, right? It's just not mandatory. I wouldn't, like, if you were somebody who didn't really get sore, but you were pushing training, progressively overloading, form looks good, you look like you're building muscle. Again, you're building muscle, right? So you don't need soreness. Like soreness isn't a thing where it's, if you're never sore, you're definitely not building muscle. I don't think that's the case. However, I do think it can be a byproduct of gaining muscle, right? And what I mean by that is things that are going to cause soreness are generally things that are, again, just going to be a byproduct of pushing your training, right? So doing more volume, increasing volume, like via weight or reps or whatever it may be, focusing on the lengthened position when you're training, right? That can increase soreness. Again, think of it more as a byproduct where it's, if you're never getting sore, could you potentially push your training more? Could you push your training more? Yes. If you're always getting sore, is that the greatest? Probably not. So again, it's something where we're not trying to chase soreness, but again, we just want to use it as data, and then that can help impact how we go about training. Like, again, if you're not ever sore, okay, can we maybe add a little bit more volume? Again, you could maybe increase your intensity. Again, if you're always sore, do we need to change up our programming a little bit? Do you need to maybe decrease how hard you're pushing it? So again, these are all things that we would want to look at. Again, how do we get sore? If you just want to get as sore as possible, you would essentially do new movements all the time, not variety. What's the freaking word I'm looking for here? Oh man, I'm drawing a blank here. When something's new, I just can't think of the word right now. Hopefully it comes to me here. So when novel. So anytime you add novelty in, that can increase the likelihood that you get sore. Eccentric. So really focusing on the eccentric portion. So if you went really slow, like on an RDL on the way down, that could increase soreness. Spending more time in the lengthened position, again, that can increase soreness. Like I said, really increasing your volume, that can increase soreness, whether that again be through like increase in volume of sets, increase in volume of like how many reps you're doing, intensity and whatnot there. So those would be some ways that you can get sore. And again, not all those mean that you're building muscle either. So again, it's a sign, but it's not everything there with that. All right, the last question of the day actually came from a client. I thought this was super interesting to go over. Speaking of core, a friend posted shirtless pics the other day, and I complimented him on his six pack. He's thin but muscular, and his response was, "Starvation is real." And then the client goes on to say, "I know I know you have to be lean to get abs, but seriously, you don't have to starve, right?" I thought this was a good question. So it's asking, do you basically have to be like starve yourself to get abs? So first, the first thing I went over with this client was, what is starvation? I think this is a different meaning for each person, right? One person's meaning of starvation is you're not eating anything and you think just severe under eating, right? That's what starvation means for another person. Another person, it means not eating any tasty foods, right? It means being a little hungry, right? So I think first it's like we need to figure out what starvation means for each person, right? Because I think these in our head, these words all have the same meaning, but they mean different. We have different meanings for them, right? So I think getting on the same page here, because for this person, starvation, it's like maybe this person is starving themselves and they just feel ravenously hungry all the time and they feel like crap. And but for them, they really want abs, and in their mind, they've made it up that this is worth it, right? But this could also mean that, hey, they're a little hungry and they have to make some sacrifices and they can't just eat anything and everything that they want. Again, so I think getting clear on what starvation means is super important. But in saying this, there's going to be some things that go into this. So first, genetics on how lean someone can be. So for some people, their body's able to be a little bit leaner and they don't really see any negative side effects of it. But then other people start to get leaner and hunger really kicks in, libido goes down the drain, energy levels suck. You just feel like crap. You're just always thinking about food, right? And that's going to be based on your genetics and whatnot, right? So that's going to play a big role in this, where again, for one person, they're going to be able to maintain a leaner physique a lot easier than somebody else. So obviously somebody that has an easier time maintaining it, it's going to be much easier for them to keep that, right? They're not going to have as much friction and they're not going to have something pulling them away from it. Whereas somebody who, again, genetically it's harder for them to be leaner, they're always going to have that. It's just going to be a lot harder for them. Now, again, we can work through this through methods, building your skills, working on your mindset, and et cetera. And obviously altering your environment, like they can make it easier. But again, I think generally if that was all equal, again, some people are just going to naturally have a much easier time maintaining a leaner physique than somebody else. I also think this is going to be dependent on genetics, on where your body stores body fat. Some people just are there, it's spread out throughout their body a little bit more, less in their midsection. And so for them, they can have abs a lot easier than somebody else. Where some people, that's the midsection's the last place for body fat to go. And so they have to get pretty lean and to a level where it's very unsustainable or very hard to get to. So again, I think genetics on where your body fat comes from is super important here. And then lastly, I think the other big thing here are your methods, right? So again, this person that he's talking about, they could really be super hungry, but it's like, what are their methods? Are they like trying to do a bunch of cardio to get to this point, maintaining a super high level of physical activity to maintain that leanness? Are they doing if it fits your macros approach? Because for them, it's they don't want to have this kind of rigidity to it to where they can still enjoy tasty foods. But now because of that, a lot of their calories are made up of more calorie dense foods from time to time. So for them, they're extra hungry. Again, do they have the genetics where their body's not very happy at a super lean spot, and they also don't have great methods, right? So these are all things that we would need to take into consideration here. Whereas somebody that, again, they've worked their way to this level, they have good methods, again, they may have an easier time maintaining. So in saying all of this, to get abs, there's going to be some hunger involved. That's just a cost of doing business. But again, it's really comes down to people deal with hunger in different ways. Hunger affects people differently. And again, we have the genetic aspect side of things. And again, where people are coming from initially, what their diet history is. So these are all things that would go into this, and it's hard to say. But really, long story short, there is going to be some hunger to get abs, but starvation, again, we need to figure out what that is, and go from there and the things that I talked about. So hopefully that was helpful and gave some insight into if you actually need to quote unquote starve yourself to get lean there with that. And then lastly, I think on that too, it really comes down to what are you willing to do and what's worth it to you? Because I think a big part of what I do with people is, all right, you say you want abs, you want to be 10% body fat or less or whatever it may be, let's do it. And if you keep running into issues to where it's not happening, there's some sort of mismatch in terms of where you want to go and what you're doing, and you ultimately decide on what sacrifices you want to make here with that. So again, I think at the end of the day, there are going to have to be sacrifices that need to be made to get lean and really, or to see abs. But again, it ultimately comes down to how far you want to push it. And some people find that it's worth it to them, and some people find that it's not. And I don't think there's anything wrong with testing it out and seeing. That's it on that. That's it for this episode. If you guys have any questions on anything like this, again, how to manage hunger, what phase of training you need to be in, then my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. We'll go into what your goals are, where you want to go, and what you've been doing, and how we can bridge that gap. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. But that's it for this episode, and I'll talk to you next time.